Good afternoon in Portland, good evening in London, good morning in Australia, and wherever you are, maybe in between. Welcome. I am Marc Blattner. I am the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland, and I'm honored to be your moderator for today's program. Today is the initial offering of the inspirational series Highlight Talks, 18 Minutes of Inspiration, developed by my teacher and friend, Rabbi Moshe Wilhelm of Portland. Our topic today will be life after COVID, from three of today's great Judaic thought leaders, Dr. Naftali Loewenthal, Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson, both of the United Kingdom, and Rabbi Dr. Laibl Wolf of Australia. Their TED Talk-like presentations will be followed by a question and answer period. But first, let's begin our program with some words from the creator of this program, Rabbi Moshe Wilhelm, the spiritual leader and executive director of the Chabad of Oregon since his arrival in 1984 with his family. He was charged by the Lubavitch Rebbe to bring light to Oregon and to establish Chabad community centers throughout the state, which he has done. He previously worked with families and youth in Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, England, Australia, and New Zealand. He is also the author of the book, 248 Points of Light, a beautiful book that answers many important questions in Jewish life. Rabbi?
Welcome to all of you around the world. It is already starting to feel warmer being with all of you. We are excited to bring to you this new program, Highlight Talk. Life and light, hope and inspiration. The program is short and sweet. Short, each speaker will present their talk in 18 short minutes. Sweet, each talk will leave you with something sweet to take with you. We have three extraordinary Judaic speakers from around the world and one great MC. Torah gives light. Torah Chaim, Torah gives life. Chaim to life.
Thank you, Rabbi Wilhelm. Now to the program and how it will work. I will introduce each speaker individually, allow them to each share their 18 minutes of inspiration, and after all the presentations are completed, we will engage in questions and answers. On the bottom of your screen, feel free to use the Q&A button to ask any questions which will be moderated at the end. The chat button has been disconnected, so it will not work. So please put your questions in Q&A. It is now my pleasure to first introduce Dr. Naftali Loewenthal, the director of the research unit, Chabad Research Unit, which runs study and discussion groups and produces the popular email series for Friday Night for Jewish Family Education. He lectures on Jewish spirituality at the University College London, part of London University. He has authored many scholarly articles, and his recent book from last year is Hasidism Beyond Modernity, Essays in Chabad, Thought and History. Dr. Loewenthal's topic is Jewish Teachings on Illness and Care from the Past to the Future. He describes his talk this way. At a time of crisis, an important Jewish response is to look at timeless Jewish sources to see how they might apply to the present. What does the Talmud say about infectious disease? What advice does it give us for the 21st century? We find interesting comments on the nature of infection and also special commendation for those who care for the sick, who go beyond the conventional call of duty, and further Hasidic teachings help us to conceptualize the ultimate goal of existence beyond disease, the eternal life. Rabbi Loewenthal, welcome, and we look forward to your remarks.
I'm not sure whether to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, but it's wonderful to be here with you. I'm now going to try and share my screen. And that seems to be going ahead smoothly, which is wonderful. Let's just try and see that it works. Right, okay. So the challenge is to fit everything into 18 minutes. So here we are. The idea is looking at our sources. And indeed, we're a people of books. Look at this range of books, the written Torah, the Bible, oral Torah, Mishnah, and Talmud, lots of other books there on the screen in front of you. What can any of these books tell us about medicine and healing? Well, to be very, very honest, they can all tell us an enormous amount. And you could write several books about what indeed is in Jewish works about medicine and healing. To take one particular example, Maimonides himself was a very famous doctor and wrote 10 books in Arabic, not Judeo-Arabic, in actual Arabic about healing. But apart from him, there's quite a lot of information. But we are going to first of all start with the Torah itself, the written Torah, which is very concerned that we should be healthy. Leviticus says, you should keep my commandments through which you will live, v'chai b'hem. If there's a danger to life, most Jewish laws, such as kashrut, are suspended because it's an important imperative to live. And living means health. Now we have another passage in the written Torah, in Exodus. If men fight and one hits the other with a stone or his fist, and the other one doesn't die, the wounded man, but he falls ill, his assailant must pay for his time off work and for his being healed. Now the Talmud explains this means the doctor's fees, the medical fees. Now the same words can be translated, he should surely heal, as if it's addressed to the doctor. And the Talmud there says, this gives permission to the doctor to heal. So there we have in the written Torah the concept of medicine. Now, here we're looking at the Babylonian Talmud, 20 volumes in a typical modern edition. And here is a page of Talmud, and you can see that in the middle there's first of all, the Mishnah, then over here begins the Gemara, Gimel Mem, the Gemara, here's the actual discussion of the Mishnah. And on one side, you've got Rashi's commentary, on the other side, the commentary of Rashi's disciples. And here on the extreme right, extra bits of Rashi, extra comments from Rashi from manuscripts. Okay, so this is the material we're going to be looking at to find out something about medicine. Now, a famous doctor in the Talmud is called Samuel or Shmuel of Nahadea, 165 to 254 CE. He was regarded so highly, he did not have the title rabbi. The Talmud says, greater than Rav is rabbi. Greater than rabbi is just his name. And so he's just called Samuel. He was also known as an astronomer. Now, Nahadea is close to or identical with modern Anbar. So we're now going to look at another volume of Talmud, Ta'anit, Tractate Ta'anit, which is about fast days. It speaks about fasting as a kind of plea to God. One might be fasting because there's a drought causing a famine, or another case, because of infectious disease. There's an infectious disease in the city, and people would be advised, they might be advised to do all kinds of other medical things. But one of the things they might be advised to do is to fast as a prayer to God on behalf of everyone. People should get better, people shouldn't get ill. Now, an interesting point is that Samuel ruled that the people of Nahadea should fast when an infectious disease broke out in distant Beit Hosea. Why? Now, let's just have a look at a map. So here we have, on the left, we have Israel and Jerusalem. Then we have Iraq with Baghdad, modern Baghdad. Anbar, Nahadea is just about there. Now, all the way to the east in Iran is Beit Hosea, somewhere around here. So it's a very long way away. Why is it that this Rabbi Samuel said that people should fast in Nehadea when the plague, the infectious disease, was a long way away in Bei Hosea? Well, the answer he gave, because of the caravan trains. Now here we have a Roman mosaic depicting a merchant leading camels in a camel caravan. There were similar caravan trains between Bei Hosea and Nehadea. Samuel felt rightly that they could transmit the disease. Now that's a very interesting point. If we go back 100 years, then there was Spanish flu, which killed an enormous number of people. Some even estimate as much as 100 million. And they didn't realize that the movements of troops at the end of the First World War had a major effect in spreading the pandemic. Also, there were victory parades in the USA and elsewhere, also spreading the disease. Now, Samuel was aware that a caravan train moving from one city to another could bring the disease. And so, therefore, we have this very up-to-date way of thinking about things. Now, what are the causes of infectious disease that we see in the Talmud? Some scholars say the evil eye. Samuel said, not the evil eye. He said it's the atmosphere, the avira. And what does it mean by the avira? Well, it could mean the miasma theory, the idea that in the air there's something unhealthy which is spreading the disease, common till the 19th century. Of course, now we have the concept of germs, bacteria, which indeed can be transmitted through the air. Samuel believed that washing one's hand and feet in warm water had a positive effect for health. That's also written in the Talmud. And the Talmud also makes the point that bathing frequently in the Euphrates is a key to good health. Now we have to see this in context. Let's just move a long way from the Talmud to the 19th century. Here we have a chap called Ignaz Semmelweis. He ran the Vienna General Hospital obstetric clinic, where women had babies. The doctors' wards, where they were looking after women in childbirth, had 3 times the death rate of the midwives' wards. So they were both dealing with women having babies, but in the doctors' wards, 3 times as many children, and for that matter, mothers, died. Why? Looked at from our point of view, the doctors were involved with postmortems. They would go from carrying out a postmortem to deliver a baby. They didn't wash their hands first. Semmelweis introduced hand washing in between the postmortem and delivering the babies. The death rate dropped, but he was criticized for this by the medical establishment and was forced to leave Vienna. Note that in Jewish teaching, hand washing and also bathing is highly recommended. For example, the monthly ritual pool, the mikveh for a married woman, for which she would prepare by a full bath or shower, and then she would dip in the mikveh. And this is something going back thousands of years. Even in Masada, they found a mikveh. So now we have another doctor in the Talmud, Rav Judah. He was a student of Samuel, and he later founded a famous Talmudic academy in Pumbedita. He believed that plague, pestilence, that means another infectious disease, among pigs could spread to humans. Now, other scholars in the Talmud didn't understand this. They thought it was only due to certain anatomical similarities between pigs and humans. But we now know that infectious disease can move across species. For example, from bats to humans, which is exactly how the COVID pandemic began. Now then we have response by some of the rabbis to an infectious disease called Ra'atan. It hasn't quite been identified. There are a couple of suggestions there. There are more suggestions elsewhere. And it's from the Babylonian Talmud, and it gives the page here. Now Rabbi Yochanan would announce, be careful of the flies found on those affected with Ra'atan, because he thought these flies would carry the disease to other people. Rabbi Elazar would not enter the home of someone afflicted with this disease. And Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi would not eat eggs from an alley, a street in which someone with Ratan lived. All right, so we can understand what they're doing. They're keeping away from the disease and they're trying not to go anywhere near it. Rabbi Joshua, the son of Levi, had a different approach. He lived in the land of Israel, and the Talmud goes on to say, Rabbi Joshua, the son of Levi, would attach himself to the sufferers, and he would study Torah with them, quoting, "The Torah is a loving hind, the gazelle, and a peaceful doe," meaning the Torah study brings grace and blessing. He explained that if Torah study bestows grace on those who learn it, does it not also protect them from illness? Now, Rabbi Joshua's concern was for the sufferer. He took spiritual precautions to protect himself. He believed the study of Torah would protect him from harm, an idea found also elsewhere in the Talmud. But his focus was on the sick person. As a leading rabbinic figure, the fact that he would attach himself to the ill person no doubt brought comfort and psychological respite. But a manuscript of Rashi's commentary on this Talmudic passage states that he would actually give practical care to the sufferer. He didn't just go and see the sufferer, he would look after the sufferer. Perhaps too, he felt that his study of Torah with the sufferer might bring physical healing to the patient. Now, that's a remarkable thing. How was his caring behavior viewed in heaven, according to the Talmud? The Talmud tells us when it was time for Rabbi Judah to pass away, Rabbi Joshua to pass away, Joshua ben Levi. When it was time for Rabbi Joshua ben Levi to pass away, the angel of death was instructed to give him special consideration and to fulfill his requests. The angel of death appeared before him. There seems to be a typo here again and again. And Rabbi Joshua asked to be shown his place in the Garden of Eden. The angel of death agreed. On his way there, Rabbi Joshua asked for the angel's knife with which he kills people he's supposed to dispatch. Otherwise, you might frighten me as we travel. The angel gave him his knife. When they got to the appropriate section of the Garden of Eden, Rabbi Joshua jumped inside, thus cheating the angel of death of the moment of slaughter. The angel of death demanded the return of his knife, but Rabbi Joshua did not want to give it up. Now, this means he was not only trying to avoid the harsh moment of death for himself, he wanted to spare the rest of humanity as well. But a heavenly voice told him he's got to return the knife. Now, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was a great American poet, and he wrote a poem about this Talmudic story of Rabbi Joshua ben Levi trying to cheat the angel of death. And the poem is called The Legend of Rabbi Ben Levi, and it's easy to find on the web. Type Longfellow, Legend of Rabbi Ben Levi, and you get the whole poem. It's a charming poem. Now, the Talmud continues with a similar account of someone else, which helps us to understand how the Talmud, or heaven, if you like, sees Rabbi Joshua ben Levi's attempts. So Rabbi Hanina bar Papa was another later sage, and he also did the same kind of thing, asked the angel of death to show him his place in the Garden of Eden. On the way, he also asked for the angel's knife. But the angel of death responded, "You want to do the same thing as your colleague, Rabbi Joshua ben Levi." So this is as if to say, who do you think you are? You're not on his level. Rabbi Hanina replied with a claim that there's not one word of Torah he had not fulfilled assiduously. He was very religious. The angel of death answered, and this is a key point, "But did you attach yourself to those infected with the infectious disease Ratan? Did you study Torah with them?" And with that, the angel of death won the argument. Now, that is the story in the Talmud. But this shows us that by his caring for the sick, Rabbi Joshua ben Levi had reached the highest level of holiness. Now, how does this apply to us today? According to figures supplied by Amnesty International, I'm not really happy to trust Amnesty. They're a very politicized movement, but the figures they suggest in March 2021 around the world is 17,000 healthcare workers died till that time, looking after people with COVID. Other figures from elsewhere, not from Amnesty, in the USA, there were 3,600 people who died in the first year, especially nurses. And many of these healthcare workers were volunteers who risked their lives for others. Now let's just have a brief look at healing in the Jewish mystical tradition. Here we have someone called Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson, lived in the 19th century. The Tzemach Tzedek, our Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, is a descendant of his and named after him. Now here we have the sacred Sfirot, the divine emanations. And you see, here comes the flow from the divine, flowing down this system into the world. It's a mystical model of the flow of divine energy into the world. Now, when there's healing and health, it's coming from kindness. When there's ill health, it's from severity. And so he explains that these kinds of flow, there is the positive flow of kindness and the withholding and concealment from severity. We do not know why God chooses to make one person ill and the other one well. We are finite and we cannot understand infinite God, but we see this structure that illness is the product of severity, a hidden flow, a hiding. Now, the Tzemach Tzedek, this rabbi explains, Rabbi Schneerson of the 19th century, it means that healing means transforming severity into kindness. And that means a flow of godliness from a more exalted, transcendent level, beyond the distinctions between right and left, between kindness and severity. And on that exalted level, all is good. And so when this exalted level flows down to the sufferer, severity reveals its inner face, goodness. And so that is what is the process of healing looked at in a very spiritual way, transforming the channels of existence of one's own being and of one's perception of the world. Now, our spiritual measures, just to conclude, for the present and the future, through us doing positive actions, love of one's fellow, Torah study, tefillin for men and boys, mezuzot, tzedakah, candle lighting on Shabbat for women and girls, kashrut, family purity, mikveh. This is a way that we can achieve spiritual health, bringing physical health. The action of the mitzvah, the commandments, brings both spiritual and physical health. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Loewenthal, very, very much. Our next speaker is Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson, Rabbi of Beit Baruch and Executive Director of Chabad of Belgravia in London. He's the author of popular books, including Positivity Bias, Practical Lessons for Positive Living. Rabbi Kalmenson's topic is Optimizing Turbulence, Transition and Transience. He describes his talk as this: many of us become disoriented when our lives take an unexpected turn. We know where we are going, and anything that veers from that course is met with resistance and even rejection. We are supposed to be in control, and we know best. But what if we saw life in a different way? What if we weren't necessarily in charge all the time? What if there's more going on in our lives and in the world than we are aware of? By cultivating an appreciation for the role of divine providence in our lives, we can discover the hidden meaning and opportunity within any situation we find ourselves in. So Rabbi Kalmenson, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. First of all, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and honor my esteemed co-panelists, the legendary teachers and spiritual masters, Professor Loewenthal and Rabbi Dr. Laibl Wolf, from whom I consider myself honored to have studied and learned and been inspired. I also want to take a moment to say that during moments like this, which allow us different human beings living across different parts of the world and time zones to transcend the limitations of time and space. The very fact that we are gathered and interconnected is itself a vessel for a spiritual blessing, and please God, reveal good for all. I want to begin by painting somewhat of a picture. Here is a fascinating anecdote that I came across in researching positivity bias that really resonated and touched a chord. It was the third night of Hanukkah, 1944, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe of righteous memory sat down to write a revealing letter to a former wartime acquaintance. In it, we are given a view into the mind of the Rebbe as he describes the spiritual impact of his experiences as a displaced person in Europe during World War II. And I quote, "Your letter awakened memories of the time we were together in Vichy and Nice under difficult and alien conditions. From the time a person is uprooted from his or her habitual environment until he grows accustomed to the demands and conditions of his new place, in this interim, there come to light certain traits of his inner character, as they are in their purity, undistorted by the expectations of society. Often, these traits reveal hidden virtues of this person, virtues that may have been hidden even from himself under the layers of social conventions." And here, my dear friends, is the punchline. Fortunate, says the Rebbe, is the person who does not allow these traits to disappear when he subsequently settles down and finds tranquility. I find these penetrating words to be a fitting frame and introduction to my remarks tonight titled Optimizing Periods of Turbulence, Transition and Transience. For isn't it true that unexpected obstacles have the potential to bring out the best or the worst in a person? When all of our stabilizing support systems are stripped away, aren't we presented with a golden opportunity to see who we really are and what we really believe? Consider the following questions. How do you handle situations that disrupt your schedule or get in the way of your life's ambitions or aspirations? When your carefully laid plans don't go your way, what then? What about sudden illness or other emergencies that force you to put your life on hold? Many of us become disoriented when our lives take an unexpected turn. We have a vision for our lives, and anything that causes us to veer from our course is met with rejection. We are supposed to be in control, and we know best. But what if we saw life in different light? What if we weren't necessarily in charge all of the time? What if there was more going on in our lives and in the world that we are aware of? By cultivating an appreciation for the role of hashgacha pratit, specific divine providence in our lives, we can discover the hidden meaning and opportunity within any situation we may find ourselves in. Here's a beautiful story. In 1967, Mrs. Miriam Swerdlove attended a Chabad convention for women and girls in Detroit. After the inspiring event, while waiting to board their plane, Miriam and some 20 other women learned that their flight was canceled due to a snowstorm. The group calls Chabad headquarters in New York to ask the Rebbe for guidance. The leader of the group, Mrs. Miriam Popak, speaks with the Rebbe's secretary and tells them that they were stuck in Detroit. The Rebbe's secretary puts them on hold, and a minute later comes back on the line and says, the Rebbe doesn't understand the word stuck. Mrs. Popak proceeded to explain what the word stuck meant, to which the secretary replied, the Rebbe knows what the word stuck means. He simply wanted me to convey to you the spiritual truth that a Jew is never stuck. Inspired by the Rebbe's response, the women got the message and they rose to the occasion. They spread throughout the airport and they began handing out Shabbat candles to the Jewish women they encountered. And as a result, Mrs. Swerdlove recounted in an interview years later, there are women and families today across the United States lighting Shabbat candles, all because we got stuck in Detroit. You see, as far as the Rebbe was concerned, there is no such thing as being stuck. Wherever you are, it's where you are supposed to be. And here's an important point to consider. Although they are sometimes confused, there is a very big difference between the cause and the reason for the challenges that we encounter in life. You see, in the story I shared, the cause of their flight's delay may have been a snowstorm, but it definitely was not the reason. The art of living purposefully is to figure out the divine reason and providence for why you are where you are, when you are, and with whom you are, and to dedicate yourself to accomplishing that particular mission. Another story. Each day, the Rebbe's wife, Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka of sainted memory, would go out with a driver for fresh air, and they drive along to a park in Long Island. One day, as they neared the park, they found their regular route was closed off due to road work, and they were forced to take an alternate route. As they drove along trying to find their way, they passed a woman on the side of the road who was crying. When they stopped at the traffic light, the Rebbetzin turns to the driver and says, "I heard a woman crying. Can you go back and check to see what that was all about?" They turned around, they drove back to the beginning of the street, where they saw workers loading furniture from this woman's home onto the truck of a county marshal. The Rebbetzin asked the driver to find out what was happening. The marshal explained that the woman had not paid her rent for many months and was now being evicted from her home. The Rebbetzin then inquired as to how much the woman owed, and if the marshal would accept a personal check. The marshal said that he had no problem accepting a personal check as long as he confirmed with the bank that the check was covered. He also said that if he received the payment, his men would carry everything back into the house. And then, to the driver's surprise, the Rebbetzin took out her checkbook and she wrote out a check for the full amount, which was $6,700. We're talking about many decades ago, and asked him to give it to the marshal. The Rebbetzin then urged the driver to quickly drive away before the woman realized what had transpired. Amazed by what he had seen, the Rebbetzins driver couldn't contain himself, and he asked the Rebbetzin what had prompted her to give such a large sum to a total stranger. The Rebbetzin explained, "Once when I was a young girl, my father took me for a walk in the park. He sat me down on a bench and began to explain to me the concept of hashgacha pratis, or divine providence. Said, 'Father, every time that something causes us to deviate from our normal routine, there is a divinely ordained reason for this. Every time we see something unusual, for that matter, there is a purpose in why we've been shown this sight. Today,' continued the Rebbetzin, 'when I saw the detour sign instructing us to deviate from our regular route, I suddenly remembered my father's words and immediately thought to myself, every day we drive by this street, but today, of all days, the street is closed off and we are sent to a different street. What might the purpose for this be? And how is this connected to me?' And then I hear the sound of a woman crying, and I realized that we had been sent along this very route for this very purpose." Friends, the above story demonstrates the Hasidic perspective that there is no place or situation devoid of God's providence. Every phase of our journey, even our detours, is meant to bring us exactly where we need to be, if we would but remain mindful and present of God's presence and providence always and in all ways. Every step is a destination of its own, waiting to be discovered, to be activated, to be sanctified. This perspective is especially helpful when we find ourselves lost or knocked off course. It is then that we are most tempted to overlook our immediate surroundings, as our mind can be elsewhere, as we can become existentially and intellectually and emotionally absent and distracted. Another story. The son of a chassid who was hospitalized just before the high holidays visited the Rebbe before Yom Kippur to receive a piece of honey cake, as per Jewish custom. Smiling, the Rebbe handed him a piece of cake and said, "Give this to your father and may God bless him with a sweet and healthy new year." The Rebbe then grew serious and added earnestly, "Tell your father that when he finishes the mission for which he was sent to the hospital, God will set him free from there." Inspired by the Rebbe's message relayed by his son, the man proceeded to initiate conversations with his doctors, with his fellow patients regarding their spiritual well-being. The day after Yom Kippur, the Rebbe sent his personal secretary to visit this chassid in the hospital. Imagine his surprise when the secretary's first question was, the Rebbe wants to know, have you completed your mission here yet? Years later, after the father had passed, the family heard from one of his doctors who said that he and his family's spiritual life and trajectory had been redirected as a result of those precious spiritual conversations during their father's time in the hospital. We can imagine the chassid initially thinking that what brought him to the hospital was a medical condition, and that the people around him were merely fellow patients, doctors and nurses. But upon receiving the Rebbe's message, he began to see others not as patients or doctors, but as individuals brought together by destiny and by providence, co-travelers on a journey, waiting to be elevated through a spiritual interaction. His medical condition was merely the cause rather than the reason for his hospitalization, which was simply the pretext for the real mission waiting to be accomplished, an illuminating encounter between souls. Another beautiful story. This particular story, our final one, speaks to those times in life when we find ourselves in between assignments or in transition or during periods of transience, neither here nor there. Rabbi Avraham Glick, a young rabbinic student from Melbourne, Australia, married a teacher from Worcester, Massachusetts, and on the Rebbe's instructions joined his wife there, assuming the role of youth director in that community. After a few years, a position opened up in Australia, and he was invited to relocate to Melbourne by the Chabad emissary there. He asked for and received the Rebbe's approval and blessings. However, once he wound up his activities and began preparing for the move to Australia, he felt neither fully here nor there. He wasn't yet gone, and yet his mind was already elsewhere. During a yechidus, a private audience with the Rebbe, he confided his state of mind, and the Rebbe responded, and I quote, "In the Torah, we find that during the 40 years that the Jews were wandering in the wilderness, they would sometimes stay in a place for just one day. Yet they would go through the tremendous effort, trouble of setting up the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, each and every time. Now, the tabernacle was a formidable structure consisting of hundreds of foundation sockets, wall sections, pillars, tapestries, and furnishings. A work crew of several thousand Levites assembled the sanctuary at each camp and would dismantle and transport it when the divine command would come to move on. And yet it was erected at every encampment, even if only for one single day." The Rebbe continues that the Talmud derives many laws from this, including the principle that if you find yourself in a place even for just one day, it is as though you are fixed there permanently. This teaches us that each and every one of our stations in life is significant unto itself. A person may find himself in a certain place or situation for a very brief period of time, and it may seem to him or her that they are merely on the way to some other place. Yet there is always something in that place or situation to be sanctified, something that can serve as a tent of meeting between heaven and earth. One should never live their life, the Rebbe concluded, as though they are standing with a packed suitcase ready to go. You see, we should always make the most of exactly where we are, no matter how fleeting that moment, situation, or encounter might appear to be. This radically redemptive paradigm, while always immediate and relevant, was especially pertinent over the past year and a half, which saw our normal world order, reality, and rhythm completely upended. Rather than experiencing this turbulent period as disorienting, as disruptive, and even destructive, the principle of specific divine providence, once properly internalized and personalized, had the power to transform these challenging times into ones that were purposeful and productive. Ultimately, the era of COVID was both a rigorous testing and training ground for the future world we are creating, which is increasingly fast-paced, unpredictable, and subject to change. Our modern society has been thoroughly disabused of the notion that we Homo sapiens can completely control world events and history. And hence the ground has been broken and is now more fertile and receptive than ever to the idea of a divine heartbeat pulsating within Mother Nature. By internalizing and integrating the principle of hashgacha pratis, of specific divine providence, into our worldview, thought, speech, and action, both as individuals and as a civilization, we will be immeasurably blessed and empowered to transform our life's detours into destinations, wastelands into wonderlands, and pit stops into promised lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Kalmenson. Really appreciated your comments as well. Thank you. I just want to remind people that there is the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so please use that so we can take your questions when we get to the moderated panel discussion. Our final speaker today is Rabbi Dr. Laibl Wolf, founder of the Spirit Grow Holistic Center in Australia. So early morning to you, Rabbi Dr. Wolf, which trains people in self-mastery of mind and emotion through the synthesis of contemporary research and Jewish spiritual teachings. He's lectured in over 500 cities around the globe and has been the keynote speaker at the International Fortune 500 Convention, the International Psychological Association, and other international forums. He's a lawyer, a psychologist, and an author of the best-selling book, Practical Kabbalah, published by Random House. He's been consulted by the Dalai Lama and Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, who wrote the testimonial for his book. He's a Lubavitcher Chassid and the older son of Polish Holocaust survivors. Rabbi Wolf's topic is mastering the challenge of stress and anxiety, navigating a COVID and post-COVID world. He describes his talk as this: we can take control of our lives. How? Stress is not something we catch like a cold or COVID. It is a result of bad choice, the choice of victimhood. The cure, an attitudinal shift. The practice, meditation, and profound commitment. He further says, the world is facing social, economic, and political upheaval, a humanitarian crisis. I don't know how it will end, but I choose to believe it will end well. Rabbi Wolf, Rabbi Dr. Wolf.
So here we are in the middle of a pandemic, and our responses to the pandemic are so individualistic. But by and large, there's a fear quotient. Where's that coming from? Is it coming from our conscious, deliberate self, or is it more from our subconscious self? I want to consider what is the nature of consciousness and subconsciousness. The Jewish spiritual teachings of Hasidism provide us with a very good indicator in context of this. Let me ask you a question. When a person dies, 3 seconds before they die, they can hear perfectly well. Let's assume that. But 3 seconds after they die, they stop hearing. Why? Well, you'll answer me that the reason is that they're dead. But what does dead mean? What's taken place? Physiologically, the ear has not decomposed. The biological machinery of the ear is intact. Why have they stopped hearing? Likewise with the eyes. Why have they stopped seeing? Can we assume correctly that something has gone missing? AWOL? What is that? Call it what you like. Some energy, some life force, be it whatever it may be, but something has gone missing. Let's call that something our soul. Let's call it the neshama. If you prefer, call it energy. I don't mind. The energy is no longer coursing through the body. In other words, the machinery is there, but the force that is guiding it is no longer there. Most pertinently, the brain. The brain is, at the end of the day, a complex piece of machinery. However, it too needs animation. It too needs an energy force, needs the neshama. The result of the neshama flowing through the brain is cogitation, intellect, thought, all these English words that talk about the dynamics of flow of energy through the brain. Consciousness is the flow of the neshama through the whole body. That's what consciousness is. It's our experience of that interface between body and soul. Now that we've established that it's a duality, let's look at another duality. We still have the problem of how does a consciousness respond to pandemic, for example. So in our teachings, we divide the energy into two component parts. We call them the nefesh elokit and the nefesh bahamit, the godly soul and the animalistic soul. Not to put animals down. Animals are a wonderful aspect of creation. But the nature of an animal is to be more instinctive, unlike a human being. A human being has a higher state of consciousness, a sense of self in context of time, flow, yesterday, today, tomorrow, hopes, aspirations. These two aspects of our energy flow, one of them guides our ego self, me, I have to look after myself, survival instinct, that's the nefesh bahamis, the more animalistic nature. And the higher self, the nefesh elokit, is altruistic, other-centered. I'm concerned about you. I'm concerned about the otherness of life, not me. And we're constantly in a state of conflict between these two opposing forces. That's the dynamic we live with. Am I, in this moment of my thoughts, my words, my behavior, going to be self-centered or other-centered? We respond as a consequence of that inner battle. What is self-mastery then? Self-mastery in our Jewish spiritual teachings is to be other-centered at the expense of self-centered. In contemporary jargon, that's called ego abnegation. In the Hasidic terminology, bittul. It means that somehow or other, I have complete faith that me being concerned about you, about the world, about otherness, is going to be for the benefit of everyone concerned. Freedom means to exercise that choice masterfully. How do we exercise choice? Bechira chofshis. We exercise choice either consciously or subconsciously. We're either afraid of the pandemic or we choose confidence. There have been some wonderful teachers that have shared their life's experience in context of that freedom, the freedom which I'm asking you to take on. Take Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, an individual who suffered 4 years of internment in concentration camps, a newly graduated psychiatrist who was able, through his ordeal, to maintain a real sense of observation, clinical observation of everything that was happening around him. After the war, miraculously survived, he writes a slim text, Man's Search for Meaning. And in it he posits this notion, which is the notion of freedom, which is that the Nazis can imprison my body, but they can't imprison my mind. Freedom is my capacity to choose my response to the imprisonment. What's going on here and going on here? Mind and emotion. He chose a very conscious, deliberate response to his circumstances and survived with this axiomatic proposition, which is the one which I'm asking you to adopt. Get there in a moment. Another wonderful survivor, you may have read her book, The Choice, Edith Eger. And she notes how when the Nazis took her parents away from her, took her sisters away from her, the mother said in those parting moments, "They cannot take away the freedom of your mind." And she lived with that and chose to respond internally freely. Yet you and I, do we respond freely to the pandemic, to the challenge, to the circumstances? Or are we enslaved by media? The whole notion that media is informational, and accurately so, I think you and I will agree, is certainly not the case. Media is a commercially exploitative mechanism which has one set of goals in mind, and that is profit margins. The more that they can glue us to the screen, the more they're going to get sponsorships. And how do they glue us to the screen? They know very well the psychology involved. Make us afraid. Because if we are afraid, we'll stay glued to the screen. We are being impregnated through our minds with a fear quotient. And therefore our constant response to challenge, pandemic, is one of fear. I'm not for one moment saying that it's not dangerous. What I'm saying is, how do we possess equanimity, balance, a sense of reality in context of this? After all, we know the stats. 94% of the world has not contracted COVID. We know that the morbidity rate is in single digits. That doesn't mean the thousands haven't died. And we do have to take care, and we do have to be careful. But let's see context. Media doesn't provide that. And that's why our response is one that is forced upon us, foisted upon us by the media. Fear. Going back to choice, Edith Eger also posits the following very interesting dichotomy. And that's a dichotomy between victimizer and victimhood. They want to victimize me, but I have a choice whether I will become a victim or not, whether I will practice victimhood or choose freedom. And here is the secret that I want to share with you. You can choose freedom. You do not have to become a victim. Viktor Frankl chose not to be a victim. You can also choose not to be a victim. How do we do that? I'm going to introduce two terms into this conversation. Emunah and bitachon. Loosely translated as faith and trust. But they're just big words. And big words make it very difficult to understand the inner dynamics. Let me share with you what the Lubavitcher Rebbe explained of these two words. Emunah is the belief that everything that has ever happened to you is for your current good. Everything that's ever occurred to you, childhood onwards, somehow or other, painful as it might have been, is for your current good. The other term, bitachon, means that the challenge you face now will have a positive outcome. What's the difference between these two? Emunah is operating from past to present. Whatever has ever happened to you is for your current good, past to present. Bitachon is dealing with present to future. The challenge you face now will have a positive outcome. I'm asking you to axiomatically adopt these faith propositions. Emunah and bitachon. Can I prove these to you? Absolutely not. Can you disprove them? Equally not. So we're on equal ground. And yet, I'm asking you to choose these faith propositions. And I assure you that if you adopt them, you will have a sense of inner balance, You'll be able to respond without a sense of fear, which is very often ego-driven, survival instinct, lower order self, nefesh bahamis, and be able to respond in a way which has hope and aspiration for the future to counterbalance. But I'm going to give you two rationales why you should adopt these two faith propositions. Harvard University, late last year, published a multi-decade study, a study of what contributes to happiness in people's lives. After some 4 or 5 decades of this research, the conclusion was that there was one factor that factored in well beyond any other factor contributing to happiness. What was it? Quality of relationships. The greater warmth and closeness people had in relationships contributed most highly to states of happiness. Now, how does that relate to what I've been talking about? If you, God forbid, are a down person, depressive, tends towards sadness, tend towards negative thinking, the result is people don't like to be near you. People like to be around up people, people who are optimists, people who make them happy. And therefore this singularly is a major precedent to good quality relationships, to be optimistic. Emunah and bitachon contribute to optimism. Relationships contribute to happiness. That's the first rationale I want to give you to adopt these axioms of emunah and bitachon. The second one is one you're familiar with, the mind-body relationship. We know full well that the way we think drives the body's functionality down to the cellular level. In other words, what we're discovering is, think positively, we're more healthy. And we have clear statistical evidence that indicates that. Positively minded people create good body health. And since health is so important to effective functionality in life, surely that alone is one of the most singular rationales that you can adopt. Relationships and health. These two factors, the product of being individuals who are positive, emunah driven, and driven in terms of bitachon. Having said that, how do you train that? How do you master that? I say meditation is one of the important tools. It's not an exclusive tool, and it has to be used wisely. No, not everyone has to meditate. And there's no right way to meditate. Consult Professor Google and you'll have hundreds and thousands of different definitions. Everyone different, everyone with their own opinion. Basically, what we want to do is to undo the habitual neurotransmitting pathway that we adopt by repeating negativity, and then it becomes habitual negativity, by practicing positive thinking, training it meditationally, repeating it, making the old pathways disused, and the new habit of positivity. So what I'm indicating here in context of these few brief minutes is that we have the capacity to train to be able to negate the fear-laden atmosphere around us and be able to approach it in a much more balanced way. To do that, you must adopt axiomatically faith propositions, emunah and bitachon. And in so doing, you have the tools to be able to respond to the fear-laden circumstances we find ourselves in much more successfully. I want to wish you a lot of success in your endeavors. And I do hope that you adopt these Jewish spiritual teachings into your life and become a happy, healthy individual.
Thank you, Rabbi Wolf, for that Rabbi Dr. Wolf for that presentation. Why don't I ask our panelists and presenters to please come on the screen. I'm going to encourage people who might have questions to go to the Q&A button and fill them in. So I'll start. And to be honest with you, I didn't know what to expect today and what the conversation would be. So I heard some very interesting things. I may not have gotten all the Hebrew terms down right, but at least I think I got the gist. So when I ask some questions, hopefully that'll be helpful. So Dr. Loewenthal, you talked about spirituality and the ability about our spiritual health will guide us to our physical health. And I was just curious if you felt that, and that you felt if COVID has made us more spiritual during this time. And then at the same time, Rabbi Kalmenson, you talked about divine providence. And so I'm just curious that, are we more spiritual today? And what about those who may be less religious or less or more agnostic in their beliefs? And where are they on that spectrum?
Okay. Thanks very much, Mark. And thank you to my two colleagues. Wonderful listening to you, and to Rabbi Wilhelm and the whole team, and Mark and Rachel putting this whole thing together. It's very beautiful to be together with all of you and our participants. Now, does COVID make us more spiritual? COVID is certainly what you would call a life event for many, many people around the world. Just the simple fact of lockdown has introduced completely new patterns into many people's lives. And I believe that there was certainly a possibility of a deeper, more inward turn for many people. Whether individuals took that or not, I don't know, but there was that possibility. One of the interesting things that developed through COVID is precisely what we're doing now, is that we're able to span the world from Melbourne all the way through to Europe, being able to communicate together. And this is something which has changed the face of many discussion groups, standard shiurim, standard study groups, which have been going for years. And now, through Zoom and other platforms, have been opened up in a most wonderful way. Israel, Europe, America, all operating at the same time. It's usually Australia is in another package, but it's a wonderful thing, and I believe that that's got a lot of potential for the future. And my university teaching as well. I have the last term I had a small group of students. One was in London, one was in Manchester, one was in Hungary, and one was in Poland, and one was in China. So I believe there's certainly the opportunity for COVID to make us more spiritual. Now, you mentioned, Mark, just before I finish, the idea of spiritual health causing physical health. Now, in the Lubavitcher Rebbe's famous letters and answers and notes to people, this theme is repeated time and again, that it is through mitzvot, through the commandments of the Torah, that the spiritual channels are open for a person to achieve what they want in the physical world, whether it's physical health, success in some aspect of their endeavors. So the Rebbe always put together the spiritual and the physical in this way. And so I would say that that's a very important thing. And thank you, Mark, for bringing it up.
Mark, maybe I'll jump in for a moment. I'd like to offer two things in addition to Professor Loewenthal. First and foremost, I think that the circumstances of the past year and a half have essentially forced us into an existential encounter and into relational and characterological encounters that under previous circumstances we would not necessarily have encountered in such a profound way. Essentially, COVID excavated some of the underlying challenges and tensions, be they in relationship between parent-child or spousal, etc., that I think at face value you could look at as negative, because in many instances the outcome wasn't positive. The unhealthiness became manifest with devastating consequences. But if you're looking at the potential, here we had a moment in time, at least in my lifetime, that was so disruptive, as it were, that it forced us to go back to the basics and to recalibrate and reprioritize the things that we so often did not have the time to really look dead in the eye. And for many people who I've spoken to, this has been a liberating and healing process that they would never have come across under what we might call normal circumstances. To conclude that thought with a quote from Bruce Almighty, if you will, where God says, let me ask you something. If someone asks for patience, you think God gives them patience? Or does he give them the opportunity to be patient? If he prayed for courage, does God give him courage or the opportunities to be courageous? If someone prays for a family to be closer, do you think God zaps them with fuzzy feelings, or does he give them opportunities to love each other? I would definitely say that COVID provided us with opportunities to be more patient, to be more courageous, and to be more loving. And so if we came through more kind, more gentle, more humble, then I think we may have taken an opportunity, a challenge, and turned it into opportunity. One other point I want to say from a Jewish communal point of view, and I know you're leading one of the most prominent chapters of the Federation, et cetera. Many rabbis, I think initially, and many Jewish organizers and leaders have have bemoaned the disruption that COVID has caused for synagogues, for Jewish centers, et cetera. And it's true that at face value, membership has declined. Many communities are revisiting how they organize themselves. But I will say this, in the 60s and 70s, and I wrote a chapter about this in Positivity Bias, about that era, and Rabbi Wolf features prominently because of an interaction he had with the Rebbe. Many Jewish leaders looked at the generational disruption, at the youth who were basically liberating themselves, as it were, from the shackles of conformity, uniformity, and organized religious and communal life. And many leaders looked at it negatively. And the Rebbe saw something really powerfully redemptive about that. He said that basically the old order has been dismantled, which will make way and room for the new order. So 2 points on that. One is that many communities have to work extra creatively in ways they didn't have to and weren't challenged to do for decades upon decades, where there was a certain taking for granted Jewish engagement. But today we know we have to think way outside the box. And one more point is that Judaism, I think for many people, and I'm in a Chabad house, so many of our community members were what you would call unaffiliated, there is a perception that Judaism is a religion of the synagogue, or as some communities refer to their synagogues as the temple. But in fact, Judaism is a home-centric religion. One of its elements is the synagogue, but its core, its cornerstone, its foundation must be the home. And I have to tell you that from a personal point of view and from personal experience, so many of our community members have taken ownership over their Judaism, have become the spiritual leaders of their families, have led the Seder for the very first time alone, and have reached out to learn how to master those ceremonies, those rituals, and make them as engaging as possible for their families. So in that respect, I think if we look beneath the breakage, there is so much breakthrough, and it's for us through the internalization of Hashgacha Pratis, of divine providence, to take that momentum and move it forward.
I think, Rabbi Kalmenson, I agree with you that people rediscovered new ways to participate and practice their own Jewish lives, whatever that Jewish journey may be. And regardless of membership in synagogues, what they did see, at least in the United States, is an enormous growth in the participation in synagogue life via online, virtual synagogue, et cetera. And, the question will be, what happens when the pandemic has passed and people have that more open opportunity to go back into those spaces that they may have been blocked from. Which takes me to you, Rabbi Dr. Wolf. You talked about warmth and closeness in relationship leads to greater happiness. And one of the things that I think happened during COVID is, on the one hand, it forced more closeness amongst people. Families were in their pods, people wouldn't go out, we were together, we would do things, you know, we acted in a different way than when we lived our normal lives. But on the flip side, it also created greater social isolation for many. I can't see my grandchildren, I can't see my kids, I can't do X, Y, and Z. So what can we learn from this when you want to talk about being happy, especially as we come past this pandemic?
I think those points are very, very relevant. I think that the experience may not be as happy as we would like them to be. And I'll give you a reason why. At the same time, during lockdown, we have had more family violence, a greater incidence of family breakdown. We've had more despair. We've had a good deal of depression. And after lockdown, I'm not so sure that these alienating factors from self have necessarily been solved. I think we've faced ourselves and are not very happy with what we have seen. And because habit is so powerful, we snap back to who we were before COVID as such. So there's a real need to do more than simply recognize the words opportunity that took place. And yes, I think many families did take opportunity. I think many in society did. But I think there's been also a lot of pain. And I'm not sure that the coping mechanisms that we have been born with are sufficient. We have to learn and train in the transition period. And therefore, to move from a place of where the news continues to be very negative, and there's in the question and answer, Olivia Schwartz raises the issue of news fasts in effect. I don't think it's realistic. And therefore, what we need to do is to have more coping mechanisms on how to critically operate within our environment, how to assess what situations we're in, rather than to be mere passive consumers, which I think we are all too often. So there's work to be done. And I think there's work to be done by those who can assist and train, and what we call in our tradition, mashpiyim, influencers, to be able to say, no, you don't just snap back to who you were. Now you have to practice a transition. You've been cooped up, you've been with your family. It's been somewhat challenging. Now, let's move to a third pattern, not the one that was before COVID, not the one that was during COVID, but now a reasoned one where you can actually create balance within the family, balance in society, and balance in the way that you critically respond to the media that consistently influences us so powerfully.
Thank you. So you talked about the altruistic versus survival instincts in people. And it reminded me to what Dr. Loewenthal said when he was talking about the goodness about healthcare workers, you know, the loss of healthcare workers who were doing this out of the goodness to help others, etc. How do we balance those two when those, you know, I see it as the altruistic ones are the healthcare workers and the people who I'm going to say is, we're wearing the mask, trying to follow protocols, etc. And then there's a survival instinct of others who say, I'm going to survive, or I'm going to lock down based on what the media was telling me I should be doing. So help me balance out, how do you deal with those two conflicting areas, or are they conflicting? If I'm in survival mode, can I still be good?
I think your very last statement is a very telling one. We have a natural disposition towards goodness. Just analyze in context of lives, your own life. What are the moments where you feel most happy? And I dare say that if you were to introspect and think about that, the incidents that you would raise are ones where you are sharing and giving with loved ones in some shape or form. There's a natural inner spiritual design of a human being to be good, to be sharing, to be giving. So that has to be factored in consciously as we respond to the exigencies of everyday life. So survival instinct is more or less all about me, food, clothing, shelter, and even later self-actualization if it's me oriented. But if you can make that shift in your consciousness, it's not about me, it's about the other. The reason I eat my food is because I want to eat it consciously and elevate the food for my energy to do good things in life. The reason I have shelter is because I want to be able to bring people into my home and allow us to reach states of closeness. Clothing. The reason I wear clothes is not to try to gain some sense of personal resonance that radiates to the rest of the world, but I wear clothes because it in some way expresses me and at the same time keeps me protected and warm. In other words, the focus of life has to be other-centered. The focus of life has to be, what is it that I'm in the world for to make a contribution to? And I think if we adopt that axiomatically in all things of life, it doesn't become a dichotomy between survival interest, me, and what I can contribute to society at large, but rather, how does every single thought, word, and behavior become dressed into otherness? And I think that's a matter of training, as I said in my presentation, retraining the way that my mind operates, retrain the way that my consciousness works. And that requires work, it requires transition, and it may take a little bit of time. It may take, as science has shown, at least 6 weeks of repetitive activity, and I think meditatively is great, to change a habit. But 6 weeks in context of 120 years is very, very short. Every one of us can undertake that.
Yes, please.
I think 6 weeks is a very optimistic view, Rabbi Wolf. I'd like to just mention an issue which doesn't directly have anything to do with COVID, but it has directly to do with what we're speaking about. And this is the climbs on Mount Everest. And the issue is that over the past few decades, it happened a few times that climbers who were so concerned to reach the top, they'd invested enormous amounts of money in order to set up their whole team and with guides and so on. And they would pass someone who was in trouble, who was maybe dying, and they just left him behind because they knew they have to get to the top. Now, that's a horrific human way of behaving, an inhuman way of behaving. And there are many people who are horrified by it in the climbing world, and they write books against it, which is how I know about it. And it's as if there are these two dimensions within people. There is an altruistic, beautiful streak within individuals. I heard a very wonderful young woman describing how she had volunteered to work in a hospital, I think it was in Oxford, and describing what it was like the first few months of the pandemic, how horrific it was. The hospitals were absolutely not able to cope at all. And with a little bit of basic training, there she was working her guts out for the benefit of others. And thank God she survived, and some did not. But on the other hand, there's another streak. And the other streak will politicize things. The whole blame concept, which has attached itself to COVID. A lot of the discussions about it in the media that you point out are full of all kinds of negative attitudes. So it's as if there's this positive and negative streak within us. And as you very rightly put it, Rabbi Wolf, and also in your talk, Rabbi Kalmenson, we have the choice which streak we're going to focus on in ourselves and which streak we're going to focus on in the other person. The other person also, there's the question of how we see the other person and what we bring out in the other person. And so it's as if COVID makes even more of a knife edge the way in which a human being is going from moment to moment with a choice, light or darkness, or transforming the darkness to light.
If I can,
Rabbi Kalmenson, please.
Yeah, just to jump in, there's just an anecdote that I share typically in the bar mitzvah setting of a grandfather having a deep and meaningful conversation with his grandson about life. And he tells his grandson, I have two wolves at war with each other inside of me. One is love, humility, kindness, cooperation, grace, dignity. And the other is greed, lust, anger, envy, conflict, arrogance. And he says to the grandson, and inside each and every one of us, this battle ensues. At some point, the grandchild asks the grandfather, tell me, grandfather, which of the two will win? And he responds simply, the one that you feed. The one that you feed. And I think this really is the running theme and the thread that weaves together the wonderful talks of Rabbi Wolf and Professor Loewenthal. And that is that we have two dimensions, and this is rooted in the works of the Alter Rebbe in the Tanya, but also Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Rav, would talk about majestic man and covenantal man, etc. And the way to negotiate that tension is by way of controlling our kingdom, inner kingdom, through thought, word, and deed. So let me just conclude with a beautiful wisdom that I read that Margaret Thatcher, her father told her when she was growing up, watch your thoughts, for they become your words. Watch your words, for they become your actions. Watch your actions, for they become your habits. Watch your habits, for they become your character. Watch your character, for it becomes your destiny.
Very nice. Thank you for that. Let me, I know some questions that some people came up with, but let me, and the panelists can see the questions in the chat if you wanted to respond directly to them, but I'll let you do it. But let me ask you this. Rabbi Kalmenson, in your talk, you talked about the testing and training ground that we are in, that Hashem has, put us through. And we've been tested through COVID. And we're still being tested through COVID. But as we see, perhaps, getting out of COVID and moving forward, what's the training that's been provided to all of us to make ourselves better, our communities better, and our world better?
Well, again, this goes back a little bit to both Professor Loewenthal and Rabbi Wolf. I think that human beings tend to be more expansive and generous in times of abundance and privilege. And when we tend to float through life when everything's going our way. And in those moments or periods, we tend to be most generous and inclusive, welcoming and kind-hearted. And by the way, the same trajectory that affects each of us as individuals, that same dynamic affects us as nations, such that unfortunately in times of crisis and in times of conflict, we retreat inward, we activate, and as it were, our instinctual side emerges because it's there precisely in order to survive. And to survive, very often it puts its own interest before the other. And so this can happen both as individuals and as a society. And that's why nations that struggle with their own sense of meaning and purpose typically can turn on, as it were, the minorities or the strangers or the refugee or the migrant, etc., without elaborating because it's beyond the scope. So in short, I think COVID presented us those extreme circumstances where there were times, as you recall, where people literally thought there would be a shortage of toilet paper. I mean, that's the type of extremes the media, in part, was able to penetrate our consciousness and sow seeds of fear for survival. And I have to say, for many, that turned them into survivalists. But for some, and I'm so inspired by the example Professor Loewenthal brought of healthcare workers, it transformed them into angels. So it basically brought out within us one side or the other, and it didn't allow us to just operate on cruise control where we don't have to make that choice. And I think that for some, they will look back on this period and say, I wish I did better, with regret and remorse. And others will say, I'm proud of the way our family, our community, our people handled this particular period. So once again, I think I want to go to one critical point. The Rebbe would talk about this from time to time, especially in the context of tzara'at, the skin affliction, the skin condition that afflicted. And there is this teaching that Mashiach is compared to a mitzora, one who has that skin condition. And at face value, this doesn't make much sense. But the Rebbe explained through the teachings of the founder of Chabad Hasidism, the Alter Rebbe, that actually when something comes to the fore, that is the beginning process of healing. When something is hidden or buried so deeply, it's not at the surface, you don't even know it's there, so you can't really deal with it. And in that context, I say that of course it's true that so many suffered, and we never understand, and we cannot understand, and we dare not try to explain or justify, God forbid. That would be an accessory to this tragic circumstance. Nevertheless, if we're trying to look into our own hearts and souls and life experience, and I think that's the key word, the distinction between looking at others versus looking to ourselves, I think we have been provided with opportunities for the issues beneath the surface to have risen and for us to have faced them and dealt with them head on. And so in that respect, I do think we've been given this situation was a testing ground, but also a training ground, because for those who haven't succeeded the way they would like to, they now know where the work lies. They now know where to focus their energies on a characterological level, on a spiritual level, be it with regards to faith, and on a relational level with regards to friends and family.
Dr. Loewenthal? Oh, you're on mute.
I would actually like to respond to a question that's come to Rabbi Kalmenson, but if you don't mind, if I, maybe you would like to respond to it, Rabbi Kalmenson?
I would very much like to hear your response.
Why, you have to share with there's a question in the chat, in the Q&A that was directed to Rabbi Kalmenson, so you can look at it and see it. Go ahead.
Yes, so the question is asking, I found your thoughts, Rabbi Kalmenson, and stories enjoyable and interesting, but isn't it dangerous to presume you know why God has put you in a particular situation? God told Moses himself, no man can see me and live. Rabbi Kalmenson, what would you answer to that?
I would love to hear your answer first, if that's okay.
Well, you know, there's an interesting idea that when two parents have a child, and they come to decide what name to give the child. And if it's a little boy, it's given at the Brit, and if it's a little girl, it's given when the father is called up to the Torah. That there's a moment of Ruach HaKodesh, divine insight, which makes them give the right name to that child. I once met someone whose wife had been given a fertility drug, and as a result of that, she had twins, 5 little babies. And they somehow had to give names to these babies. And 6 months later, each baby was the right baby for the right name. He told me this. It was like a miraculous thing. Each baby had exactly the right name. So I would say that when a person is confronted with some striking new situation, that there is a sort of little Ruach HaKodesh, a little prophetic flash that comes into the person. I know what I have to do in this situation. It is something which is unprecedented. Here I am, stuck, so to speak, at an airport. I know what I have to do. There are other Jewish people in this airport. I have to walk around. I have to befriend them. I have to talk to them. For many people in America, there's only a tiny percentage of Orthodox people compared with the whole of the Jewry in America. Here is an opportunity for a meeting across the barriers, and that can change people's lives and can indeed do so, as you told the story told by Mrs. Swerdloff, Rebbetzin Swerdloff. So I believe that there's that moment of insight in a person's mind that they realize, this is what I have to do. Okay, Mendel, over to you.
So Rabbi Kalmenson, 1 second. I want to be mindful of, we're almost at the conclusion of the program. So Rabbi Kalmenson, why don't you quickly answer, and then we'll turn to you, Rabbi Dr. Wolf, for final comments from you.
Well, that's a beautiful answer, Professor Loewenthal. I think that there is no way to know with any degree of certainty, and the key word here is certainty, what God's plan is, unless one learns of that plan from a holy person, a tzaddik, a rebbe, who are gifted and touched with the higher insight and perspective, Ruach HaKodesh. Otherwise, in the absence of that direct communication, we do not know with certainty. We can only use the gifts God gave us, our mind, our heart, our soul, our faculties of critical thinking, and powers of deduction to assimilate all the information before us that culminate in practical positive action. And those are the key words: practical positive action. Take the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife, right? She heard a cry. It was a very specific situation. She found out that the woman couldn't pay the rent. She then found out how much the woman needed. She took out her checkbook and she wrote the check, and she helped the woman in need. I think in that situation, it's fair to say we would all agree that that would have been what Hashem was inviting her to participate in. Sometimes it's less clear. My point is, when we listen and we receive and we assimilate what's before us through our mind and heart, we are taking the gifts God gave us and utilizing them to come to our own conclusion of what needs to be done with practical, positive action. And I think that's the most we can achieve, not more, but definitely, hopefully, not less.
Rabbi Dr. Wolf, answer anything you'd like or share whatever you'd like. Oh, I think you might be frozen. Rabbi Wolf, can you hear us? Okay. Well, I think we have a technical issue with Rabbi Wolf. So, well, there you go, Rabbi Wolf, go ahead.
Okay, question and answer, question raised. As you will see in the Q&A chat, that was in the eyes of the individual a differential between the way that the Orthodox community responds to COVID and the secular community responds. And to my mind, I think it's perhaps a fraction oversimplistic to be able to divide the world in that particular manner. The Orthodox community is dozens and dozens of different communities, and the secular communities even more so. And I use the example, for example, of conspiracy theorists, which go into a number of different categories. The anti-vaxxers, perhaps, who are concerned about future outcome of a vaccine that hasn't been tested sufficiently, right through to the fact suggested that the government is trying to control us by putting liquid into our bodies in order to be able to follow our movements and the like. And you've got the whole range in between. I think that firstly, the idea of how we feel about information that we know nothing about tests our own integrity as an individual. I think we have to set aside sometimes information and say, I don't know the answer. There isn't sufficient data. And no, we don't know exactly what will be the future of the vaccine outcomes in 10 and 20 years' time. And no, I don't know whether, in fact, I'm being manipulated or not. But I still have to have a recognition that I've been brought into the world. I have a connection to something that's far more supreme. Call it God, call it the centrality of energy. There's something about me that is important, significant, and worthwhile. And because of that, I'm going to choose my belief system, and I'm going to choose positivity, to use a word in Rabbi Kalmenson's book's title. And I think that that choice makes such a significant difference to people's quality of lives. There is no way to prove that life is positive or negative beneath it all. On the other hand, we have to have the courage to make that choice. And to make that choice affects the way that we then interface with community, interface with family, and interface with ourselves. And I challenge everybody who's in our audience today to make that choice courageously, because it will change and affect not only our post-COVID response, but our response to life itself. Life is good, God is good, and you can be part of that whole wonderful process called creation.
Amen. Well, thank you, Dr. Loewenthal, Rabbi Kalmenson, Rabbi Dr. Wolf, for, I'm going to say, not only your wise words, but your warmth and inspiration today. We're greatly appreciative. I also want to thank Rabbi Wilhelm for creating Highlight Talks. I want everybody to know this is the first of what we hope are many of these types of programs in the future, and we'll keep you posted as they get scheduled. In fact, in due time, you'll receive a link for this video of today's program and an opportunity to share any feedback or comments that you might have for future programs, topics, ideas, etc. So wherever you are in the world, enjoy your morning, enjoy your afternoon, enjoy your evening, and everybody should stay well. And thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.